Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. I am so incredibly thrilled you're joining me today because we are about to dive into one of the most profound, just awe-inspiring depths of the gospel narratives. We're going to look at a story you probably think you know backwards and forwards, but we are going to unlock it using the very specific, unyielding architecture of the Old Testament. Seriously, get ready, because looking at it this way, it kind of changes everything.
So here is the big question we really need to grapple with today. What if the most famous healing in the Gospels, the woman with the issue of blood, wasn't just some private medical misfortune getting miraculously cured? You know, us modern readers, we tend to reduce this down to a simple healthcare transaction. It's almost like she finally found a doctor who accepts her insurance after a 12-year wait. But when we actually look through the lens of ancient biblical realism, this encounter was an explosive, cosmic collision between the Holy One of Israel and a world completely dominated by decreation.
Okay, let's dive right into our roadmap for today. We'll be covering the Levitical diagnostic, suspended time and thrownness, the grammar of noetic renewal, Christ the mobile sanctuary, and finally, the anti-thrownness community.
Starting off with Section 1, the Levitical diagnostic and the unyielding architecture of Leviticus 15.
To really understand the true stakes of this woman's 12-year affliction, we absolutely must establish the precise Torah background. Leviticus 15 carefully distinguishes between two distinct female bodily realities. First, we have normal menstruation. That's a cyclical, bounded, 7-day period of ritual uncleanness that just ends naturally. But in stark contrast to that, we have a completely different category, chronic discharge, or zob. This is a pathological, unbounded discharge that happens outside or beyond the customary period. The woman in the Gospels, she falls strictly into this second category of zob. It's essentially a boundary failure where life is literally escaping its divinely ordered container. Now, here is a fundamental, totally mind-bending distinction we have to make. We must separate ritual impurity, which is called tameh, from moral guilt, which is avon. This woman carried absolutely zero moral culpability for her bleeding. She was not being punished for a sin. Rather, tameh represents a ritual incompatibility with the sacred space of Yahweh's tabernacle. And because Leviticus explicitly says the life of the flesh is in the blood, her unceasing hemorrhage literally represents life leakage. This was mortality operating proleptically, like actively and daily, within her living flesh. Moving into Section 2, Suspended Time and Thrownness, exploring the psychological reality of being trapped.
Just imagine the psychological and liturgical consequences of this diagnosis. They were devastating on a daily basis. Under Leviticus 15:28, the mandatory 7-day purification countdown, called the sapar, cannot legally begin until the flow actually stops. This creates a permanent, inescapable suspension loop right on day 1. For 12 years, her purification process was entirely frozen. She could never reach the 7th day of cleansing, which means she was completely blocked from the 8th day. And the 8th day was the golden day of priestly presentation and sanctuary restoration. Her covenant time was completely, hopelessly suspended.
This brings us to a really fascinating concept scholars call existential thrownness, or Geworfenheit. It perfectly describes our unchosen condition of existing within a fallen creation east of Eden. This woman, she represents thrownness personified. She didn't choose her illness. She certainly didn't choose her economic ruin at the hands of failed doctors or her ceremonial exclusion. But over 12 long years, her perception completely collapsed her identity into her circumstance. She became known to society, and tragically to herself, simply as the woman with the flow of blood.
Let's look at Section 3, the grammar of noetic renewal, where we decode the linguistic keys of the miracle.
We are going to zoom way in on the microscopic Greek grammar used in the gospel accounts right now, because hidden inside these specific verbs are the secret keys that unlock exactly how this miracle unfolded. The cognitive spark actually happens in Matthew 9:21. Matthew uses this brilliant causal connective, egar elegein in heote. For she kept saying to herself, the verb elegein is in the imperfect active tense, which means continuous, habitual internal speech. You see, the miracle didn't begin when her physical hand touched his cloak. It began in her mind. She actively and repeatedly fought off 12 years of medical despair through this continuous inner speech, driving what we call noetic renewal. We can actually map this entire transformation using the Human Experience Knowledge Model, or the HEKM sequence. Her grim reality of 12-year bleeding was suddenly interrupted when she heard the reports about Jesus.
This perceptual interruption sparked that transformed internal dialogue we just talked about. And finally, it led to embodied faith action. Because biblical faith isn't just some disembodied intellectual agreement. It was her spirit-enabled perception that completely reorganized her physical agency, giving her the literal strength to risk public exposure and press her way through a hostile crowd. And what exactly did she reach for? The text specifically says she touched the kraspedon. In the Greek Old Testament, this translates directly to the tzitzit, the covenant tassels commanded in Numbers 15. These tassels, with their distinct cord of blue, were there to remind Israel to keep Yahweh's commandments. Reaching for this wasn't an act of random superstition or some kind of magic trick. She was purposefully, intentionally reaching for the one faithful Israelite who perfectly embodied the very covenant she had been barred from for over a decade. Now, Mark 5:29 gives us another just incredible detail. It says, immediately upon touching him, the peg A, the subterranean fountain or spring of her blood was dried up. Christ didn't just offer her a quick band-aid or suppress some external symptom. He bypassed all of that, went to the subterranean root of her corruption, and shut off the decreation at its very source. And there is a brilliant, totally undeniable shift in the Greek verb tenses right here that we can't miss. Mark uses the aorist passive exiranthe, meaning her blood was instantly dried up. The aorist tense signifies a sudden, decisive, once-for-all historical event. No gradual physical therapy needed here. Then Jesus actually speaks to her using the perfect active tense, sisoken. Your faith has made you well. The perfect tense denotes an action completed in the past, but with abiding, permanent results. And that word for well, sozo, it signifies holistic rescue and covenant salvation. She didn't just get a medical cure, she was permanently, wholly restored.
Section 4. Christ, the mobile sanctuary. The explosion of reversal and new creation.
When this woman touches Jesus, we see an absolute explosion of reversal that changes the entire geometry of sacred space. Under the static Old Covenant tabernacle, the rule was brutally simple. Unclean touches clean, and the result is unclean. Impurity was always contagious outward. But Jesus, he operates as the mobile sanctuary. When her unclean hand touches his holy garment, we see reversed contagion. Instead of Christ contracting her defilement, his active, offensive holiness, his dynamis, flows outward. He completely swallows up her decreation without ever becoming contaminated himself. It's absolutely breathtaking.
Then, Jesus turns to her and issues a royal imperative, tarseo, take courage. With this single, incredibly authoritative command, the King of the universe dismantles 12 years of accumulated psychological shame, terror, and fear. He doesn't just heal her body, he completely heals her mind.
Finally, Section 5, the anti-thrownness community, conferring true covenant identity.
So the physical healing has happened, right? But Jesus is not finished. He initiates a very public relational restoration that sets the stage for what the church is actually meant to be. Think about it. If the woman had just slipped away unnoticed, sure, she would have had her physical healing, but she would have remained socially anonymous and totally trapped in her shame. Instead, Jesus stops the entire crowd actively refuse an anonymous transaction. She falls down and tells him the whole truth, and then he publicly addresses her with a unique, incredibly tender title, daughter, or thygator. In one single word, he dismantles her condition-based label and confers full covenant adoption. He commissions her into kingdom shalom. And wow, think about this. He was literally on his way to heal Jairus' 12-year-old daughter. By healing this woman's 12-year affliction on the way, Christ is actively demonstrating absolute, unquestionable authority over both the gradual decay of life and sudden death.
Which leaves us with this final, highly provocative thought to chew on today. If Christ, operating as the mobile sanctuary, successfully reversed the flow of death and completely rewrote this woman's entire ontology, what does that actually mean for us? Is the church, empowered at Pentecost, actively living today as the ultimate spirit-created anti-thrownness community? Yes, we inhabit mortal bodies, but our core identity is no longer defined by our diseases, our economic status, or our social exile. We are anchored in the enthroned Messiah. Our throne conditions literally no longer possess final authority over who we are. Just imagine, how differently would we live if we truly believe that? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.